to have an Australian robot lady to do my bidding.
Okay. It's fine.
All right.
Nothing weird about that. I'm going to start this over again because that was like a full minute of babbling. Here we go.
Yeah, fair enough. And it doesn't show me in the greatest of lights.
Oh, that's still on video. Don't worry about it.
Uh,
Okay. Now we're starting again. Zoom.
Okay.
All right. Ready?
When you are.
1, 2, 3. I'm going to tell you a few stories, Mark. All right. Just brief
Wonderful.
little stories. And they all have one thing in common.
Beautiful.
And I want you to see if you can figure out what the common thread in these stories
I
is.
love games. I fucking love games.
I know you do.
Yes, please.
So let's do it. So our first story. In November of 2015, students at Outwood Academy in Ripon showed signs of sickness and feeling faint sometime between 11 and 11:30. The ambulance service said children were treated at the school and a hazardous materials team also attended. The school confirmed 4 children collapsed during an Armistice Day service and 40 were treated on site. A parent of one of the people said, quote, "I rang the school to check my daughter was okay. I was told a couple of children had collapsed during a remembrance service." Another pupil, who did not wish to be named, said students had collapsed in the school's hall. A student said, "When the first boy was sick, we thought it was one off, but then there was a big slap on the floor and someone had fainted. After that, it was a bit of a domino effect. Another 3 or 4 collapsed, and then people started leaving the hall to get fresh air. One of the boys who fell was a bit concussed and had a big lump on his head. After they ushered us out quickly, a couple of girls had panic attacks." The student then said that lessons went on as normal during the afternoon, but more students complained of feeling sick and suffering from headaches.
Okay.
In 1998, at a high school in Tennessee, a teacher complained of a pungent gasoline-like smell in her classroom. Soon after, she fell ill, reporting symptoms such as nausea, shortness of breath, dizziness, and a headache. Almost immediately, several students in her class started to experience similar symptoms, and before long, the rest of the school was stricken. In 2012, Takhar province in Afghanistan was alerted to what was feared to be a mass poisoning of girls at a school in the Telugu district. Some 74 girls became ill and were taken to the hospital to be treated for the effects. Also in 2012, teenage girls from the small town of Leroy, New York, started to exhibit symptoms similar to those seen in Tourette's syndrome, such as uncontrollable jerks of the limbs and verbal outbreaks. The symptoms also appeared in a 36-year-old woman and a teenage boy.
Wow.
So what do you think the common thread is here, Mark?
All right, let me replay what I've heard there. So
recap.
Ripon, is that Ripon in Yorkshire? Ripon in Yorkshire.
Yes,
in
that
the UK.
sounds right.
So
yes, in the UK. Yes.
Ripon. Did you say Tennessee?
I believe New York was. It was
okay.
Ripon, New York, Afghanistan. Oh yeah, and Tennessee. Yes, Tennessee.
And Tennessee. So I can't see any common thread there in terms of geography.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. All involving kids.
Yep. Yeah. Mostly these are teens.
All involving schools.
All of them involving schools in one way or another.
All involving some sort of hysteria, some kind of fainting episodes, some kind of, I'm going to say the common thread here is a kind of mimetic hysteria that spreads outwards from an observed event. And kids go, oh, fuck, I've seen something bad. Maybe I feel bad too. And then they're out. I'm going to say,
very well done.
Yeah. What's the word I'm looking for? Some kind of mass hysteria, hypochondria event.
Very well done, Mark. That is more or less exactly what this is. I loved watching you work through that. That was very good. Good. So the common thread here, fire departments came, checked for leaks. Environmental agencies looked for toxins in soil and water. Blood tests were taken from sufferers. Epidemiologists were called in, and nothing was found that could have caused these large groups to fall ill. What they'd experienced is what is called mass psychogenic illness,
or beautiful.
Sometimes called mass sociogenic illness, but the same kind of thing. And what this is, it's also called MPI for short, so I will use that throughout this so I don't have to keep saying mass psychogenic illness. It's a type of mass hysteria, like you were kind of on the track of, in which groups of people, and it's usually women, manifest physical illness they've seen in someone else, essentially out of anxiety.
Yeah.
So there are a few different sets of criteria for MPI set out by various different researchers in various studies. I read a lot of studies because for some reason, this is really fascinating to me. I got real deep into it. I was just like reading papers about this all day yesterday. And I liked these particular criteria, which came from a study published in the journal Epidemiology entitled Frequency and Predictors of Mass Psychogenic Illness. So according to this study, an MPI event entails first the presence of somatic bodily symptoms, to a pre-existing social connection between two or more of the affected people. 3, an epidemic spread of symptoms, so it occurs in greater numbers than would be expected in a given period of time. 4, an attribution of symptoms by affected individuals to a threatening external agent of a physical, usually chemical, biologic, or radiologic, or spiritual nature.
Yep.
And number 5, probably most importantly, symptoms and signs that are not compatible with the environmental exposure specified by the affected individuals, nor with any other environmental exposure that could reasonably be expected to have been present at the time of or shortly before onset of symptoms. So the key here is that there can't be an environmental explanation. It's not connected to something actually in the environment.
So would you like to know why I reached for that answer as quickly as I did?
Please
listener, do please believe that I have no prior knowledge of what Corey is going to serve up here. I had no clue what she was going to talk about.
Nope.
Because I have an absolute clear as crystal memory of precisely this phenomena happening in secondary school.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
When I grew up. So every secondary school age kid at around 13 and 14 has a vaccination, right? The MMR jab, measles, mumps, rubella. And I clear as day remember the day that we had the MMR jab in school in Treaga Comprehensive. Big up yourself, Treaga Comp crew. When it seemed like within the space of 45 minutes, 1 or 2 kids were like, "Oh, I feel a bit faint." So they got like some gym mats out in the school hall for them to have a bit of a lie down on, right?
Yeah.
And within a fucking hour and a half, just wall-to-wall gym mats and kids sprawled on the floor. And, knowing some of those kids who were kind of, lying down, spazzing out, for want of a better term, they weren't the type to pretend to be able just to get off a couple of lessons. These were kind of, these were good kids having a quote-unquote reaction to a totally safe, completely benign vaccine because they'd seen it, because their peers had seen it, and a cascade effect that began, and it had radiated outwards from this ground zero of what did you say? Psychogenic?
Mass psychogenic illness.
Oh, God, that's fucking such a sexy term. I love the term psychogenic. David Lynch used the term psychogenic, a psychogenic fugue, to explain what goes on in it's Lost Highway. Is it Lost Highway? Yes, it is Lost Highway. When Balthazar Getty and Jeff Daniels swap fucking bodies in the middle of the fucking film. Yes, terrific. And yes, and I've seen it happening, and I absolutely can attest to its power.
Yeah, and what you're saying here is so key in it too. The thing I want to point out about this is that it's real, right? Mass psychogenic illness is technically in the mind, but it's real. It's not people faking illness. What you said here about like these aren't kids who were like, "Oh, I want attention," or whatever else. They saw what happened and they actually manifested those symptoms within themselves. And there's 2 main types of these MPIs. The most common in Western countries is anxiety hysteria, which is triggered by extreme sudden stress within a close-knit group. And most of these are actually triggered by foul odors. So usually something smells off, someone gets stressed out and reacts to it. Other people get stressed out and react to it, and that's what causes it. But your MMR example is exactly the same kind of thing, right? So they knew
a chemical
something
agent.
had
Yes.
happened,
Yes.
chemical agent, and this had, they saw someone have a reaction to it, which can happen, of course, or the person was just stressed out and they, reacted that way, but it causes this. So in this case, symptoms are transient, benign, and typically include dizziness, headache, fainting, and overbreathing. And most victims recover within 24 hours. The other kind is called motor hysteria, and that arises from long-term anxiety. Common symptoms include twitching, shaking, trouble walking, uncontrollable laughing, weeping, communication difficulties, and trance states. And I was just listening to a last podcast on the Left series about the plague, and they were talking about like how there was like a dance epidemic that went through, and they're not entirely sure.
That rings a bell. Actually, I think I've heard about that.
And no one's entirely sure why this happened. Like it could have been like that, what is it, like ergot or whatever it is, poisoning that people blame a lot of weird things that happened in the past on, but also potentially it can be this kind of hysteria caused by so it says symptoms appear slowly over weeks or months under exposure to long-standing stress like a plague. And typically take weeks or months to subside after the stress has been reduced or eliminated. So Simon Wesley at the Institute of Psychiatry at King's College London, and he was actually a researcher on the paper I mentioned before, he said it may be that someone faints or has a fit or a medical incident, and what then gets transmitted is anxiety. People get anxious because they don't quite know what it is. And the thing about anxiety is that it gives you symptoms. You feel frightened, you shake, you get a dry mouth, you get butterflies in your stomach, you might get chest pain. The next thing you know, you've keeled over. And not all episodes of it are benign and easily resolved. Complex cases occur when stress builds up and becomes chronic in a population. So in these instances, the effects can be absolutely explosive. In regions where people live in fear of being gassed or bombed with nerve agents or struck down by witchcraft, mass psychogenic events can affect hundreds, even thousands of people at a time. They can suffer muscular tics, twitching, or shaking for weeks and months. Wesley says these things become huge when the rumored explanation is both dangerous and credible. So in that story I told you about the case of the girls in Afghanistan, for example, there was a legitimate concern that those girls had about poisoning because there are several extremist groups, including the Taliban, that are very much against girls being educated. And so girls in other schools had been poisoned. And so this causes this extreme stress in these girls. So when one person fell ill, all of them had this huge anxiety that like, oh my God, the Taliban has come for us now, and caused this, this mass hysteria, if you will.
So a couple of questions that come to mind here then. I haven't read much about this in a long time, but as a kid, I remember reading about the origins of the zombie in folklore. And I believe it goes back to Haiti. And what you've described there, the bodily twitches, the paralysis, the kind of the terror, the spreading of anxiety because it gets blamed on a supernatural or another worldly root cause. Is that, I suspect that might be where that came from.
It certainly could be. I don't know that that's necessarily like that's been determined to be the case, but it can certainly have that effect. I mean, it's also something that people attribute potentially the Salem witch trials to, the witch things there that, again, that same poison is sometimes blamed for maybe why they acted out these ways. Some people think they were just faking, but potentially this could also be what caused that, there was a lot of stress and anxiety around something being manifested, and it caused all these people to start having the same kinds of, or the small group of girls, but to start having these like twitches and shakes and whatnot.
So my other question is then, back in my school, I vividly remember my good friend and remains a good friend of mine, Chris Thomas, now lives in Australia, turn to one another and look at all these kids on the floor. What the fuck is wrong with these kids? There's nothing. There's clearly nothing going on. There's clearly nothing wrong with any of them. Why were we not affected?
Well, and the fact that you had a trust in the vaccine might have been a part of why you weren't affected by it. Maybe you'd had vaccines before, maybe you just were kind of like, you know, that's your general attitude towards these things anyway. So in order for them to manifest these symptoms, they would have had to have uncertainty or anxiety about the vaccine in the first place, which is not to say they had to be vaccine hesitant or have like a determined fear of it, but there had to be some level of uncertainty in them about what it was going to do, on top of potentially, you know, the way that people empathize with one another, the way that, you know, they've kind of been socially trained makes a difference. So there's like a lot of factors that go into what makes someone particularly susceptible, which, you know, is also, you know, that most of these things happen to women has a lot to do with the anxieties that women face in society and the way that women are socialized to empathize with one another and sort of, you know, take on other people's baggage and whatnot, and to feel that kind of stress in ways that males are not socialized to do so. So there's like a lot of different factors that can go into why some people are susceptible. But I would say, you know, if you were looking at it like it's just a vaccine, like we've had a bajillion of these, why would this cause this? What happened to these kids? Then you weren't in a mindset that would make you susceptible to that happening to you.
Are you saying perhaps that I was simply stronger than all of my peers?
I am not saying you were stronger.
might that be what you're suggesting?
That's not what I'm suggesting to you at all.
You can't rule it out, can you? Somehow just more resilient, robust than all of the other kids in my school. Is that maybe what you were saying?
No.
I'll leave that for you to decide.
I refuse to humor you in this. But there, with all of these kinds of things, what you see is that they're usually happening with some sort of stimulus that you can trace to the location that they're in, right? So normally this starts because of a foul odor. That's where you find most of this from. Or your MMR vaccine, or whatever the case may be. You get these people in proximity, they experience some sort of stimulus and they respond to it. However, in the case of the girls in Leroy, New York, with the Tourette's-like symptoms, this was a whole other animal entirely to what researchers were used to with MPIs. Normally, in this phenomenon that we have recorded instances of for hundreds of years, the central element is proximity.
Okay.
That's why, you know, the foul odor, MMR, et cetera, can trigger it. Everyone is experiencing the same stimulus that causes the anxiety. However, the epidemic in Leroy started when a girl posted a video of herself on YouTube documenting the symptoms.
Wow.
So these Tourette's-like symptoms had seemingly manifested out of nowhere in this girl, and she wanted to show what was happening to her. So she posted a YouTube video showing one of these episodes of what was going on. And then that video went viral. Once that happened, as I mentioned before, more teenage girls experienced those symptoms, as well as a teen boy and a woman in her 30s. Now, they're from the same area, but they weren't...
Oh, what, through having seen her video?
Through having seen her video. The woman said...
fantastic.
Yeah, the woman, the one in her 30s, said she'd seen the teen's case on Facebook, and that led researchers to realize, holy shit, social media may have transformed the very nature of mass psychogenic illness, where before things required you to be in the same general vicinity, now it could be transmitted by suggestion through the fucking internet.
Oh, that's incredible.
Right?
That is so good. That is so good.
So all of this sort of highlights that connection between stress and anxiety and the physical body, because we do tend to look at like what happens in our brain and the rest of our body as totally different things, but they aren't, obviously. We have one body and the brain is in charge of most of what it does. So if your brain gets freaked out and thinks that it's sick, it sends messages to the rest of your body that actually physically make it ill.
Wonderful.
And that is what we are seeing with MPI.
Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. I mean, it feels like another layer, another strand of this capability that social media has to transmit, you know, mimetic fear, like we spoke about with Momo a few weeks back. It can transmit ideas, it can transmit, you know, trends, quote unquote, on TikTok. you could be kind of receiving all sorts of fucking trends that you don't even know that you're even picking up, or being broadcast, psychogenic illnesses coming at you through social media. Fucking hell. If Stephen King hasn't written that, by the way, it's only a matter of time. You know what I mean?
Seriously. I mean, it sort of makes me think of, like, if you go on WebMD and you like look up something, all of a sudden you're convinced you have cancer or whatever. Like, you're like, well, maybe I do have these symptoms, and you start to feel like sick or whatever, which is in general not a thing I do, but a lot of people do that. They they start to feel the things that they read when they're looking at like a WebMD thing. And this is sort of like this mass version of that. You see someone have something and it starts to make you anxious. Well, that came out of nowhere for that girl. What if it came out of nowhere for me? And you end up tricking your brain into thinking that this is a thing that is actually happening to you. And it's wild to think that now we've shifted the way that kind of thing that can happen. It has always happened, as far as we knew, through human history, but now we've just created a whole new way of doing it. Gotcha.
Is that your dog? I can hear.
Yeah.
It's awesome. No, I mean, obviously the idea that social media can make you psychosomatically sick just hugely appeals to me. And in terms of history, we're still very, very much in the early days of social media, and the effect that it's going to have socially on developing minds has yet to be counted, can't possibly be counted. This, I think, is just one of many, many things that, with the benefit of hindsight, we'll be able to look back on and go, oh yeah, that's when that all fucking started.
And hopefully, because we can see that budding, and sociologists, psychologists, and epidemiologists are looking at it, we can curb some of those effects instead of letting it run rampant like many of the ills of the internet have done.
Along with deep fakes, I think that's something I'll start to keep an eye on.
Yeah. See where you see it.
I'll start to just keep a little eye out for this. On deepfakes, just really briefly, this is something that I meant to mention a couple of weeks ago. Neither of us saw deepfake map imagery coming, did we?
Deepfake map imagery?
Yes. So bird's eye top-down views of cities and towns, completely procedurally generated, that don't exist.
Oh.
Yeah. Which can be used in propaganda, which can be used in dis and misinformation. You can now procedurally generate an entire fucking town map viewed from the top down, which is, indistinguishable to the naked eye from an actual map of a real city. Like satellite imagery, buildings and homes and parks, people that don't exist, just don't exist.
I don't need that.
No one needs that.
No one needs that. There's no practical use for that. Stop this.
No one needs it.
Stop this science.